want to talk a little bit here for maybe half an hour about the return of Yeshua. Some Christians will say, I don't know why you keep talking about all this stuff because the Lord said no one will know the day nor the hour. So how can you know when he's returning? And well, that's exactly true. The Lord did say that. So let's pick that up we're going to be spending all of this time in the 24th chapter of Matthew. And we're going to start at verse 36, and then we'll go back further in the chapter and go through the majority of it. So in verse 36, and this is all the Lord speaking in this chapter, or the vast majority of it anyway. He says, no one knows when that day or hour will come. Even the angels in heaven and the Son don't know. Only the Father knows. And then he says, when the Son of Man comes again, it will be exactly like the days of Noah. In the days, now it's funny because a lot of people quote that verse 37 in isolation. And of course, you can't do that because context is all important. And the context is created by what happened before and after verse 37. And I've got that handy study guide that you should use whenever you're looking at the text to help you ask a lot more questions than you might ordinarily think of. So when the Son of Man comes again, it will be exactly like the days of Noah. And here's the context. In the days before the flood, people were eating, drinking, and getting married until the day that Noah went into the ship. They were not aware of what was happening until the flood came and swept all of them away. That is how it will be when the Son of Man comes again. Now, it sounds like if you just read that portion in isolation, that the Lord is saying, look, you're not going to have any clue. It's just going to happen, and that's all there is to it. But that's not the case. So let's read back through Matthew 24, and we'll start to see that actually the Lord gives us a ton of signs on what's going to happen here. All right, so we start off in verse 3 of Matthew 24. As Yeshua was sitting on the Mount of Olives, his disciples came to him privately and said, tell us, when will this happen? What will be the sign that you are coming again? And when will the world come to an end? Yeshua answered them, be careful not to let anyone deceive you. Many will come using my name. They will say, I am the Messiah, and they will deceive many people. Now, we've got this guy right now who is from Australia and is now living in the UK. And he's telling everybody, he's got a lot of videos up on YouTube, that he's the reincarnation of Jesus Christ. So there's going to be people like that are going to come across our path, that we're going to see on the internet, that are going to be telling us, this is the Messiah. And Yeshua is telling us in advance that people are going to do that. Verse 6, you'll hear of wars and rumors of wars. Don't be alarmed. These things must happen, but they don't mean that the end has come. Nation will fight against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? We're seeing these earthquakes in various places right now. I just did a previous recording about that. And famine is most certainly going to come. The earth is cooling, and we're already seeing a lack of availability of food. And of course, the price of food is going up. But when he's talking about nations will fight against nations and kingdoms against kingdoms, seems to me that's a pretty clear reference to World War I and World War II. You see, when we look at World War II, we had multiple nations of the world coming together as a kingdom, fighting against each other. And that's probably what it's referring to. But Yeshua says all of these things are only the beginning pains of the end. So he's saying that there are certain things that are going to occur that we should be looking out for, that are going to signal the beginning of the end, right? Verse 9, Then they will hand you over to those who will torture and kill you. All nations will hate you because you are committed to me. Then many will lose faith. They will betray and hate each other. Verse 11, many false prophets will appear and deceive many people. And because there will be more and more lawlessness, most people's love will grow cold. And of course, that's exactly what we're seeing right now, that there is more and more lawlessness. And we just had another earthquake off the coast of Oregon. And as this lawlessness increases, people's love toward each other grows cold. People become suspicious of each other. They don't trust each other. They get riled up at anything because they're watching the news and they hear about all the stuff going on, and somebody cuts them off in a parking lot, and all of a sudden it's the end of the world. But then he says, but the person who endures to the end will be saved. And this is why it's so important that we take preparedness and being wise and getting out of the cities and making sure we have an adequate supply of food, because he told us famine was coming, that we make sure we have energy and we're able to take care of our families as best we possibly can. So some people just live in this idea that, well, it's just God's will. And, for me, whether I live or die, and why would I get out of the city? If God wants me to live, I'll live. Well, he's told you to endure until the end. So, it behooves us to pay attention to what he's saying and be wise. If he's telling us what's going to happen and to endure until the end, then we should pay attention to that and make sure that we're in a position where we have a better chance of survival. Verse 14, this good news about the kingdom, which he's been talking about for several chapters here, will be spread throughout the world as a testimony to all nations. Then the end will come. So he's giving us these clear signs. Verse 15, the prophet Daniel said that the disgusting thing that will cause destruction will stand in the holy place. Now, in other translations, the most common way of rendering this is the abomination of desolation will stand in the most holy place. Now, my personal opinion of this is that it's referring to Yahweh. And we're going to see Israel rebuild the temple, the third Jewish temple. And they will resume animal and grain sacrifices in this temple. And in the book of Daniel, it tells us very specifically that the clock of this 7-year period of tribulation starts when they resume animal sacrifices in the temple. But then abruptly, 3.5 years later, these sacrifices will stop, and this abomination of desolation, this ugly thing that causes destruction, is going to stand in the temple. And then the sacrifices will cease. Now, it makes sense that then the person that we're talking about here is Yahweh. When you see this, the disgusting thing that will cause destruction standing in the holy place, those of you in Judea, in the cities, should flee to the mountains. So here I've been telling people for so long, get out of the cities. Why? Because I read the text and I see that this is what's going to happen. And you should preempt that. You don't have to wait to the last moment. You can be wise and go, well, if this stuff is going to play out, I better make sure I'm prepared, right? He talks about this with such urgency that he says, those who are on the roof, now the dwellings that we find in the first century here at the time, I always find it strange that in the West, we build these houses with roofs. You've got this beautiful elevated space, and then you just put a roof on it. Why don't you use that? Now, obviously, you got snow, you'll have to accommodate that somehow, but that's not that hard. You can put a drain plug in. But here in the first century, they would use the space on top. They would have a ladder or a staircase to get up there. And so people would hang out there and they would drink up there and have social gatherings with their family and friends. And so he's saying those that are on the roof should not come down to get anything out of their houses. Those who are in the fields should not even turn back to get their coats. It's going to be a very, very strong sense of urgency. Verse 19, how horrible it will be for the women who are pregnant or who are nursing babies in those days. Pray that it will not be winter or a day of rest, a holy day when you flee. So this goes back to, well, we don't know the day nor the hour. It's like, well, it's always winter at some point on the earth, right? Verse 21, there will be a lot of misery at that time, a kind of misery that has not happened from the beginning of the world until now, and will certainly never happen again. Now, if we kind of take that in context with everything that's gone on the last 100, 120 years here on Earth, we've seen about 160 plus million people slaughtered at the hands of communists and Marxists and other tyrants around the world. A lot of bad, tragic things have occurred. Of course, here in the West, we tend to focus on the Nazi Holocaust, which of course was bad. But far more severe things have actually occurred. Far more people have actually died. And yet Yeshua is saying here that there will be a lot more misery at this time as this all plays out. A kind of misery that has not happened from the beginning of the world until now. And then leaves us this promise that it will certainly never happen again. In verse 22, he says, if God does not reduce the number of those days, no one would be saved. That's how severe it's going to be. They're after everyone. Right? In Revelation 5 and Revelation 9, we see these two mass cullings of humanity. The first time, a quarter of the population. The second time, a third of the population. Together, like if we had 8 billion people, that cuts our population in half. It's a really big deal. And so Yeshua is saying that if God does not reduce the number of those days, no one would be left. But those days will be reduced because of those whom God has chosen. Verse 23, at that time, don't believe anyone who tells you, here is the Messiah, or there he is. False messiahs and false prophets will appear. They will work spectacular, miraculous signs and do wonderful things to deceive, if possible, even those whom God has chosen. So we're going to be in this situation where those that consider themselves followers of Jesus, Yeshua, people that call themselves Christians, are going to fall for the greatest hoax of all time. People claiming to be Jesus Christ. Right? We go back to that guy in the UK. He says, I am the reincarnation of Jesus Christ, and I'm here to reform the world and kick out all the elites, and we're doing this through this legal process. And people like that are going to be a dime a dozen. But the interesting thing is that the Lord tells us that these people aren't just going to make these claims, but rather, quoting from the text, they will work spectacular, miraculous signs and do wonderful things to deceive. So these are people that are going to actually perform things in front of people that the gullible are going to look at and go, Israel, you're obviously wrong because this person just rose somebody from the dead. They did this or they did that. In Revelation, we see the beast calling down fire from heaven. How can you say this isn't God? Who else can call down fire from heaven? Didn't Yahweh call down fire from heaven, Israel? And isn't Yahweh God? And so we're going to see these incredibly powerfully deceptive people come onto the scene that are going to claim to be the risen Lord. And so many people are going to be fooled by it. Yeshua continues, listen, I've told you this before it happens. So if anyone tells you he's in the desert, don't go out looking for him. And don't believe anyone who says, well, he's here in a secret place. Our religion, our cult, we have him here, hidden away. And he's about to raise up an army and overthrow the elite and kill all the pedophiles. And it's all going to be wonderful. This is really it. You've got to believe. You've got to be a believer, Israel. But the Lord is telling us, listen, I've told you this before it happens. So if anyone tells you he's in the desert, don't go out looking for him. And don't believe anyone who says he's in this secret place. And then Yeshua makes it crystal clear. He says, the Son of Man will come again just as lightning flashes from east to west. Now, right now, I'm writing a novel. Every so often I dive into it and write a little bit more. It's not a big priority for me right now, but I'm having fun writing it. And in this scene, I've actually spent some time on it. And I have everybody in their vessels. They're all orbiting the Earth. And they've been planning this for some time. It's their demonstration that we're here. And so all of these vessels all around the world, all under the command of one of the chief angels, who is ready to tell them all to go. They're in their craft, they're all ready, and all of a sudden they get the command and they start zipping around the world. And we see the maneuverability and the speeds of these UFOs. You know, we have that UFO that was caught in Utah doing unbelievable speed that was caught on somebody's drone. If you're not familiar with that, you could just put it into Google, I'm guessing. UFO recorded by drone in Utah. And this craft is doing unbelievable speeds, but nothing like the Tic Tac UFOs that the military has observed, where they can go from 60,000 feet to just under the sea, just under the surface of the water instantly. Like, how does that happen? So now imagine all of these vessels that are in orbit around the Earth all of a sudden deciding to zip all around the Earth. What would it look like? It would look like lightning flashing from east to west. You'd see all of these white bands of light crisscrossing across the sky. This incredible sign that, hello, we're here. And so that's how I've written it in the book, and I think that's probably fairly accurate. Verse 28, the Lord says, vultures will gather wherever there is a dead body. And I've read a lot of commentary on verse 28, and I don't think anyone really understands, or at least not that I've read. I'm sure many people understand, but nothing that I've read where they really understand what Yeshua is saying here. He's been talking about all of these false messiahs doing all of these magical things in front of people to deceive them. And then he says, vultures will gather wherever there is a dead body. What he's talking about here is that these deceivers will take advantage of anyone who is a gullible person. The gullible are everywhere. It's the majority of people. And these people will gather around the gullible and suck them in. Vultures, the deceivers, will gather wherever there is a dead body. Verse 29. Immediately after the misery of those days, the sun will turn dark, the moon will not give its light, the stars will fall from the sky and the powers of the universe will be shaken. Now, obviously, we're not going to have these distant stars, these distant suns, some of them that are 1,000 times bigger than our sun, suddenly fall to the ground, right? That's obviously not going to happen. What is it talking about? Well, we've got a guy right now who I'm kind of fond of. I'm always suspicious of, but I'm kind of fond of, Elon Musk, who's launching all of these satellites. Now, I learned just the day before yesterday that he's going to launch a lot more of these Starlink satellites than I realized. This was new information to me. The United States has given Elon Musk permission to launch 30,000 of these Starlink satellites. And as you all know, we're waiting for Starlink to arrive here. They're promising it by the end of January. So, less than 8 weeks away. I'm counting down the days. Do we have full broadband again and I can do live streaming video again? It's going to be quite the change. It's been 9 months since we've really been able to do that. But he's also received already permission from the Russian Space Agency to launch 40,000 additional Starlink satellites. So there will be this is additional. 30,000 have already been authorized by the US. And why wouldn't he just get authorization to launch another 40,000 from the US? Because this administration hates his guts. And the video that he did of an interview today, which I posted, you really must watch that interview. He really describes how he just doesn't like government at all. He despises government. So the current government won't give him permission for the other 40,000. So he went to Russia instead. And they've given him permission to launch an additional 40,000. There'll be 70,000 of these satellites in orbit. And if that sounds like a lot, you're not wrong. That is a lot. So imagine you've got this alien species that has come to another planet and they plan to invade and take over the planet, which is the story of the Lord's revelation to John, right? The book of Revelation. What's the number one thing you're going to do to blind the enemy? Well, you're going to knock all of their satellites out of orbit. And that's so easy, when you've got these craft that are so highly maneuverable and can do unbelievable speed, all you do is catch up to one of these satellites and you just give them a little bump, and you push them to the ground and it deorbits them. And what will happen when you do that? All of a sudden, the sky during the day and the night is going to be illuminated with all of these stars falling from the sky. It's a strategic move. It's a military move. And I think that that's what it's referring to here when the Lord says the stars will fall from the sky. And I do think it's interesting that Elon's satellites, he already has, half of all the satellites in orbit right now are Elon Musk's private property. Imagine, it's not even a publicly traded company. They're all privately owned. He personally owns them all. It's pretty amazing, actually. And yet there's going to be a lot more. But if you're an alien species coming to invade a planet, you want to blind the enemy. And the best way to do that is to take down all of their satellites. And all you do is nudge them to the ground and they all deorbit. There's no way they can recover. And they're gone. And it's interesting that it says the stars will fall from the sky and all of Elon Musk's satellites are called Starlink. I don't think that's a coincidence. Possible, but I don't think it is. Verse 30, then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky. All the people on earth will cry in agony when they see the Son of Man coming on the clouds in the sky with power and great glory. Now, I think all of this is interesting. I think this is very interesting too, when he says that we'll see the sign of the Son of Man appearing in the sky. What exactly is this? this sign of the Son of Man. I think the best possibility for this is actually their planet. Right now, their planet is far too far away from us for it to be glowing in the sky. We can't see it with the naked eye. But the speed that this planet is going to come through the orbital plane is going to be really quick. And so at one point, like let's put it in a calendar year. In January, you're not going to be able to see anything with the naked eye. You'd need a very, very powerful telescope. But by March, it will be perfectly visible. That's the kind of speed that it's going to come through our star system with. Now, when we look at the planet of the crossing and its representation of the cross symbol all throughout ancient history, long before Yeshua came on the scene, when we see Egypt and the Ankh with the inverted teardrop, which is clearly representing the orbit of the planet of the crossing, the star is the symbol of, you've got the flat bar, which represents the orbital plane, and then you've got the upright beam that represents the planet of the crossing coming up from the south and crossing through the orbital plane. It's most likely, though I'm not set on this by any means, but it's most likely referring to the visibility of the planet of the crossing in the sky. And it's a big planet. It's 4 to 6 times the size of Earth. We know that already through the mathematics from the wobble of other planets. But now I posted that article about 2 weeks ago where it looks like we've already found the planet of the crossing. And they probably know where it is. They're probably observing it right now. But if it is nearby and it's going to come through here, it would be very interesting timing. I don't know, but I think that is what Yeshua is referring to here as the sign of the Son of Man appearing in the sky. Verse 31, he will send out his angels with a loud trumpet, and from every direction under the sky, they will gather those whom God has chosen. So some people have a ticket out of here. We've talked about that in the past, and we'll do a video on that later, because that's an important topic. Christians call it the rapture, and the rapture used to be extremely popular and has kind of fallen out of favor in recent years. And now there's a lot of people going around saying, oh, it's an invention of the Schofield Reference Bible that made a really, really big deal about this. And certainly the idea of a rapture removing all Christians from the earth has certainly kind of, given a lot of Christians apathy about the whole thing. Well, I'm just waiting for my ticket out of here. And then we've got the Left Behind series that was very popular about 20 years ago, where it made a really, really big deal of the rapture. We'll get back to this actually a second. The Lord talks about this again just a little bit further on in this chapter and in a bit more detail. So then the Lord says, learn from the story of the fig tree. When its branch becomes tender and it sprouts leaves, you know that the summer is near. In the same way, when you see all these things that he just described, you know that he is near, at the door. I can guarantee this truth. This generation, this is some confusion amongst Christians. So people love to isolate a verse and attach all this context to it without going through the verses prior and after. And that's why I created that very useful Bible study guide to help you expand the context of the text so you can get a better understanding of what's being said here. When he says, I can guarantee this truth, that this generation will not disappear until all these things take place, he's not talking about the people that he's talking to at that moment, that he's sharing this with. He's talking, it's obvious, to you listening to me share all this, that he's talking about people that are going to witness all of these signs that he's just told them about. So as we start to see all these things, he's saying that our generation will not disappear until all of these things take place. And then he kind of solidifies it by saying the earth and the heavens will disappear, but what I'm telling you, my words will never disappear. So we get back to the whole thing of whether we're going to know one way or the other where he's coming. And we get back to verse 36 where he says, no one knows when that day or hour will come. And that's true. Of course it's true. The Lord said it. But he's telling us here that we're not going to be able to set a date on our calendar. No one's going to know the day or the hour. But he just spent all of this time giving us all of these signs and telling us that the people that see all of these signs won't pass away until all of these things I'm telling you about are actually going to occur, including his return. So there's a difference here between the day and the hour and the season, right? It's like summer is a season. On our calendars, we say, well, we break it up into 4. Other countries don't, by the way. They have slightly different ways of looking at the seasons. Some just have 2 seasons a year. But we have 4 seasons here: fall, autumn, winter, spring, summer. And a season is about 3 months, right? 3 times 4, a full year. So what he's doing here is saying, you're going to know the general idea, the general time frame that something is going on, especially when we can look at what he's talking about with the abomination of desolation, or the ugly thing that causes destruction, standing in the temple. He says that when you see that, you better run. You better get out of the cities. That's why I'm telling you now, get out of the cities. Why are you telling people to get out of the cities, Israel? Because the Lord said that there's going to come a time where you're going to want to flee the city, and better you be prepared in advance. So there's no contradiction here. We're not putting a date on anything. We're not saying on September 24, 2029, the Lord is returning, right? But we are saying that we should be paying attention, just as the Lord said. In fact, he made it clear in verse 32. Learn from the story of the fig tree. When its branches become tender and it sprouts leaves, you know that summer is near. In the same way, when you see all these things, you know that he is near. Right. So we should be paying attention because he told us to. So we go back to where we started now, talking about the days of Noah. And let's just repeat that and we'll read on a little bit further. When the Son of Man, this is verse 37, Matthew 24:37. When the Son of Man comes again, it will be exactly like the days of Noah. In the days before the flood, people were eating and drinking and getting married until the day that Noah went into the ship. They were not aware of what was happening until the flood came and swept all of them away. This is how it will be when the Son of Man comes again. In other words, the vast majority of the human population, doesn't matter about their salvation or whether they're going to be with us in the kingdom in the end, which I think the vast majority will be. But it does mean that they're going to be completely clueless. It's like some of us talking now about climate change or COVID, trying to get into the heads of all of these people that have fallen for these 2 hoaxes. They can't see it. They're blind. And so it's going to be in the time before the return of Yeshua. These people are going to laugh at you and mock you. It's like, what are you talking? Look, man, I'm late for a wedding. I got to go. Like, whatever. Good to talk to you. Take care. No idea. Really gullible people that lack wisdom, that lack knowledge, that lack understanding. And they're just going about their day-to-day lives. As I said, it doesn't mean that, what, they're going to hell. No, I think pretty much everybody is going to be with us in the kingdom, but they're not going to know what's going on. So the Lord continues in verse 40, and this is more about the whole rapture thing. Verse 40, at that time, 2 men will be working in the field. One will be taken and the other will be left behind. That's where Tim LaHaye and whatever the other guy's name is got the title of their series from, right? The Left Behind series. I've read every single one of those, 2 women will be working at a mill. One will be taken and the other will be left behind. Now, I'm completely 100% convinced that this is talking about a craft landing on the ground and somebody opening the door and saying, hey, come on, it's time to go. And somebody being taken and removed from the situation. But this is deep into all of these things happening, and an awful lot of people are going to die beforehand. Now, some Christians think, well, all the Christians are just going to be raptured out of here. No, the Lord said that many will be taken away and imprisoned and tortured and killed, especially those of us that have put our faith and our hope and our trust in Him. But there will be those that have been able to escape all of that. And at least some of us are going to be removed from the picture. It's not going to be suddenly disappearing and leaving your clothes and shoes behind, which is kind of the Christian rapture idea that is very popular. No, someone's coming to get you. The Lord said He was going to send out His angels all over the world to collect you. That's not a rapture. That's not disappearing all of a sudden. That's somebody coming to get you and removing you from the picture. Verse 42, therefore, be alert, because you don't know on what day your Lord will return. You realize that if a homeowner had known at what time of the night a thief was coming, he would have stayed awake. He would not have let the thief break into his house. Therefore, you too must be ready, because the Son of Man will return when you least expect Him. So it's important that we have a balanced understanding of this whole thing. We're not going to know the day or the hour, but the Lord has given us a multitude of signs to pay attention to be aware of, so that we would know, man, this is it. Any day now, it's going to happen. And we will be right, because we'll be paying attention. So this kind of ties into the talk I did just earlier tonight about seismic activity and the planet of the crossing and the possibilities there. And, I keep watching and waiting and asking the Father that His Son comes quickly. But we must be aware that if the biblical text is accurate and true, then about half of the earth's population is going to be killed before the Lord comes and restores order to the earth. And this is going to be a very practical thing. It's not like we're all going to be whisked away. No, we're going to be here for 1,000 years. And although it doesn't say explicitly in the text, I can assure you, nobody dies during that time. Even though it talks about in Revelation 22, at that point, having access to the fruit of the tree of life. All of the people that make it through this tribulation period, the 7-year period of just death and destruction are going to also get access to the fruit of the tree of life, and we will live the entire 1,000 years before we are finally removed from this planet and taken to theirs on this massive transporter that is referred to in the Lord's revelation to John, that can take an enormous amount of people, a lot more than 8 billion. So just wanted to share this with you this evening. Hope you've gotten something out of that, and I appreciate you so much for listening. I'm going to end the recording.